What is going on, everybody? Welcome to this Monday old school edition of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. I am your host for this episode, the Young Buck, Andy York. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining us for this very special edition of the Old School 101 episode. We are so glad that you are here. Before we dive into the episode, once again, we'd just like to shout out bodyslam.net for picking us up and allowing us to share all of this glorious podcast with their subscribers and listeners and viewers. We appreciate them, as well as Sportinarium. We appreciate them for all of that they are doing and everything that they are playing our episodes and everything. We appreciate all of them over there. Make sure you go check out Body Slam and Sportwire so that you can enjoy more of the wrestling community, because there is a lot of it out there. So we really appreciate you guys doing that for us. As always, I cannot do this alone because I don't know a whole lot about what we're talking about today. So if we did it alone, it would be a very short and boring episode, which might be your thing, but sorry if you don't like it. But as always, I am joined by the normal host of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, Chris Belcher. How you doing, man?
Man, I am, full disclosure, allergies are kicking my tail today.
Tennessee, you gotta love it.
You gotta love Tennessee, that's right. I'm quite a bit under the weather today, but you know what? I'm going to power through because this is a very important topic. I'm very excited to talk about the Ruthless Aggression documentary series. My favorite era in the world of pro wrestling, not the Monday Night Wars. My favorite era is Ruthless Aggression. So I'm pumped to be here and I'm pumped to talk about it. And I'm pumped to educate you, to give you a little 101 lesson on the Ruthless Aggression era.
Yeah, I think I came into wrestling like right at the back end of this. So this is kind of like where some of my knowledge, because I've seen a lot of this stuff that we're talking about. I just don't know a lot of the backstory behind it. And there's a lot of things that we're going to talk about. We may, disagree on some things, which I'm very excited to talk about because, we have differing opinions, and how dare we have different opinions and still be friends and host a podcast and talk to each other? So it's
in 2021. How do we do that?
I don't know.
How does that exist?
I know, right? I can just exit the broadcast and just let you do it yourself if I get too mad. I just won't bring up Starcade. So, anyways, we're gonna dive right into this. As Chris said, we're gonna be talking about the Ruthless Aggression documentary series. This is season 2 of it on Peacock, so cheap plug for them. You can go check them out. Go watch this. It is a fantastic documentary. We like to knock WWE in a lot of things, or I do at least. I like to knock them on a lot of things, but they always kill it with these documentaries. I can't really remember a bad documentary yet. Their 24 series is amazing. All of their behind the scenes stuff is really, really cool. And this was no different. We had five episodes that we're going to jump into and talk about. We're going to start with the very first episode, which is all about Hollywood Rock, which is The Rock kind of coming back into the WWE after going out and making, I guess it's an okay movie, The Scorpion King.
It was fine.
It was what it was. He's done a lot better stuff since then. He's done a lot worse stuff since then too, but he's done a lot better than that. True. We'll never forgive him for doing the Tooth Fairy. Anyway, so this is kind of the jumping off point in a lot of ways for the Ruthless Aggression era, is with Hollywood Rock. So kind of first off, what were your thoughts on this episode? Did anything stick out to you? Was there anything that you didn't know or that you learned from this documentary? And kind of what do you remember during this time? Like, what do you remember from The Rock's return with Hollywood Rock and with Hogan and everything like that?
Well, let me just say, first of all, that this, surprisingly, even though I'm wearing a Shawn Michaels t-shirt, this was my favorite episode of the 5 of season 2. And the reason is because this version of The Rock is why I am a fan of The Rock. Like, it's not that I didn't like his Attitude Era stuff. It's not that I didn't like what he did with the corporation. And, because I've been on this record, I can't even talk this morning. I've been on record on this podcast of saying how much I love the Stone Cold Steve Austin Rock feud prior to the WWE Championship. So the Intercontinental title stuff in 97, where they're doing the beeper and they're throwing the titles off the bridge, and I love that stuff. But this version of The Rock is why I am a huge fan of The Rock. I love that they highlighted the stuff with the hurricane. The Rock called him the Hamburglar, which I loved. And the Rock concert always will go
Oh
down
yeah.
as some of my favorite Rock stuff ever. I think the reason I love this version of the Rock so much is I feel like this is very, very close to the genuine person that Dwayne Johnson is.
Yep.
Like, I feel like if you're capturing that on the screen, that's what it is.
Yep.
So, as much as I was a fan of Shawn Michaels' return, I mean, that's the reason I love the Ruthless Aggression era so much.
Mm-hmm.
But close second to that is Hollywood Rock.
Yeah, I think this is going back and watching this documentary and everything. A lot of the things that I remember first seeing of The Rock came from this era. Not necessarily all of his Attitude Era stuff, but it was mainly this. I think one of the first things I ever saw was one of the promos he did with the Hurricane, where he like pulled out his phone and said, "Oh, The Rock's got a phone call. It's nobody. He says he knows you, whatever." And like it's just who The Rock is, and it's so funny.
Oh gosh.
And you can tell. I think because especially for The Rock, I think him going to Hollywood and doing movies just opened up that personality even more. Which is crazy to think about that. Crazy to see that. So obviously one of the main things that they talked about here was the Hogan Rock match that took place at WrestleMania. WrestleMania 18, yep. Where Hogan was coming in with the NWO and was supposed to be quote unquote the heel of the feud, and The Rock was supposed to be the face. And very quickly, both of them realized that was not going to happen at all, because it's the first time Hogan's been back in WWE for quite some time. And obviously the NWO was one of the hottest things out of WCW, was still one of the hottest things during that time period. And so you had Hogan coming in, you had The Rock coming in, and it seemed like at the beginning of the match is when they both were like, we've got to kind of change everything. What do you remember from that match specifically? It's one of the better Hogan matches in my opinion, but what was your opinion of that match?
I remember vividly watching Monday Night Raw live the night that they had the face-to-face promo where this match was announced, where Rock challenged him. I remember vividly watching it and like losing my mind. Not that I was a huge Rock fan at the time, and not that I was a huge Hogan fan at the time, but the weight of this match, like these two guys, oh my gosh, like the chemistry was there from the beginning, you could tell. I've gone on record on this podcast a lot of times and said that I don't necessarily believe everything I hear out of Hulk Hogan's mouth. So take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. I was listening to a podcast. Hogan was on After the Bell with Corey Graves right around WrestleMania time earlier this year. So I think it was either the Friday leading into WrestleMania or the one before that. It doesn't matter. Anyway, they were talking about some of his WrestleMania moments, and this match came up. And Hogan says that when they were planning out this match, Rock came to him with a very intricate list of spots and moves, and this is how the match is going to be laid out, and yada, yada, yada. And it wasn't that Rock was so concerned about delivering a good match, because obviously we know he can.
Right.
It was a matter of, hey, this is a huge match. I want to try to protect Hogan and make him look as good as I can. So here's what we do. And Hogan was like, Rock, I don't like this. We just need to go out there. We need to listen to the people. We need to be listening to the people, and we'll call it on the fly. So there was supposedly a little bit of tension as far as how the match was going to go. Well, that comes up even more when the match actually happens, like you were talking about, and the crowd really turns. I think it's a Hogan Canada thing. It's just a Canada thing. I don't understand it, but it is. So they flip, and the match works out to perfection. Kudos to both of these guys for being able to deliver a match like this on the spot. And I'll say this, I wrote this down in my notes after watching this documentary, and I think this Hogan match leads right into this point, is that I know that The Rock is on a lot of Mount Rushmores in wrestling fandom and that kind of thing, and as he should be.
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think he gets enough credit as a heel.
Oh
Like
yeah.
when we talk about the greatest heels of all time, his name I don't feel like is in the conversation.
Right.
And I feel like it definitely should be because there wouldn't be Stone Cold wouldn't be as popular if he didn't have a heel Rock.
Mm-hmm.
And just all of these kind of things. Rock was so good as a heel, but he was one of those heels that you love to hate
Yeah.
because he was so good.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that a lot of wrestling fans look over is he's not given the credit that I think he deserves.
Oh yeah, because you go back to the I think it was one of his rock concerts, I believe it was, when he dropped the "I'll Come Back" when the Lakers beat the
Oh
Kings
my gosh.
in LA or in May or something like that, and it
Listen,
was just it was
listen,
honestly it was the same kind of joke that Elias made
yep.
that got the same exact kind of reaction in
Mhm.
Oklahoma City, and it was perfect, and
Yep.
it goes to show that he was really good at getting that type of heat with people.
Well, and not only that, like full context, again, I think this is what fueled my fandom for The Rock. That Rock concert happened in 2003, and that was
Mhm.
leading up to WrestleMania 19. 2003 was right in the middle of the Lakers Kings big feud.
Yeah.
It was so the Lakers three-peated in 2000, 2001,
Mhm.
2002, and every single time they beat the Kings on the way to the championship. And I was a huge Lakers fan.
Right.
Kobe Bryant is my all-time favorite player. God rest his soul. I have no problem in saying that.
Yeah.
So I was a huge Lakers fan. So for him to come out and deliver that line
Yeah.
in Sacramento, like, dude, I was losing it.
Oh,
Like, it
yeah.
was great for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was there's a lot of moments like that. Like, there's not a lot, but there's a few moments like that in just wrestling history. You think of that, you think of, when Shawn went back to Montreal and
Uh
said, "Who's
huh.
your daddy, Montreal?" and
Uh
faked
huh.
out with Bret Hart and everything else. You think of
Hmm.
Elias and Kevin Owens and in Oklahoma City, and so when you can generate that kind of heat, even
Yep.
though you are one of the most loved wrestlers and characters and just personalities of all time, goes to show how, like, he had an understanding of what his
Yep.
job was and what he was supposed to do. And you know I think a lot of parallels, kind of not here recently but over the last couple of years, of the same way that WWE fans have felt about The Rock then is the same way that WWE fans kind of felt about John Cena a couple of years ago, with him just kind of coming in and going and caring more about Hollywood and everything
Hmm.
else. And so you can kind of see where that trust was broken, kind of between The Rock and between WWE Universe, but how quickly he was able to bring that back just because of how talented he was and how great he actually is.
Hmm.
Um, so you kind of talked about this. Is this your favorite version of The Rock as Hollywood Rock?
100%. Yep.
Okay.
100%. And it just, I don't know what it is. I think
Yeah.
it's more of this is the real Dwayne Johnson. I think it's more of, I don't know, maybe it was just the perfect storm of the time that, this was the first time that we really got WWE by itself with no
Right.
WCW.
Yeah.
So for me as a fan, it was an opportunity to sink more into WWE and sink more into their characters rather than, let's say, 3-4 years ago, if somebody would have come out and say, "Oh, I'm doing a concert," well, I'm probably going to flip to the other channel,
Yeah.
see
Yeah.
what's going on Nitro. But because it's Rock and he's doing all this, like I was locked in. So yes, this is my favorite version of Rock for
Gotcha.
sure.
Gotcha. Was there anything else about the episode that kind of stuck out to you, or that you wanted to bring up?
Um, I don't. I just this to me again, it just goes to show that Rock, I don't feel like gets enough credit for this run in particular
Mm-hmm.
because of everything that he had to balance. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Like he he went off to do Hollywood, yet, but he came back and he did this big run with Austin. And I love that it talked about Rock and Austin and their relationship and how nobody really knew this was Austin's last match until it actually happened, and it
Right.
happened to be against Rock and that kind of thing. So I think just overall, I thought this was a really fantastic episode and a really nice peek behind the curtain for fans who maybe dismissed this era of Rock for one reason or another,
Mm-hmm.
or weren't watching during the Ruthless Aggression era. and I don't want to say didn't know this version of Rock exists, but like I said, dismissed it more.
Yeah.
I think this was a really good eye-opening experience for those kind of fans too.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's move on to episode 2 of the Ruthless Aggression series, which was all about innovation. And I really thought that this episode was extremely interesting from a lot of standpoints, which kind of we're going to probably go down a rabbit hole because I have a thing I want to bring up probably towards the end about the current day product and things like that. So we're going to have a lot of fun with that. But during this time period, during this Ruthless Aggression era, there was a lot of innovation and innovative matches and um, concepts that were introduced during that time. Obviously, one of the first ones that they talked about was Raw Roulette, which was not really heard of that often. I think that the only time they'd really ever done it was in WCW with Halloween Havoc.
Yep.
And so now you have it coming to Raw with the Raw Roulette, which brought way to one of the best TLC matches, just a random TLC match on Raw. What was your kind of thoughts about Raw Roulette? Because they've done it a couple of times since then, and it hasn't necessarily been the same as it was the very first time.
Well, I think it's very interesting that WWE was able to take these WCW-like concepts and bring them to their show, but not necessarily say, "Hey, we're bringing this from WCW." So I don't know if we're skipping ahead just a little bit, but the Elimination Chamber, supposedly the idea at the beginning was War Games.
Yeah.
For the Elimination Chamber. Triple H had been pushing for War Games for forever. Arn Anderson had been pushing for War Games for forever. Well, I think that they didn't bring War Games because it was so fresh from WCW that they didn't want to immediately just say, okay, we're stealing everything from WCW. Here's War Games.
Yeah.
But like you mentioned, they hadn't done the spin the wheel, make the deal in several years from WCW. So I think it was okay to bring some version of that.
Right.
And for it to be in Vegas and for it to be the way that it was with Bischoff and his crazy mind and whatever. And they've, like you said, they've tried it again in NXT and several different things like that. I enjoyed Raw Roulette simply because it was different. You didn't know what you were going to get. I think there was one night where they did Raw Roulette, and this wasn't highlighted in the episode, where they started the show with musical chairs. And musical chairs came down to Ric Flair, Eugene, and Chris Jericho.
I remember. I've seen that.
So I'm pretty sure that was a Raw Roulette as well. So they also did a version of this at the No Way Out pay-per-view in 2003 when they did there's like a 2 out of 3 falls type thing between Steve Austin and Eric Bischoff. So they had this in there as well. I'm surprised they didn't highlight that. But all that to say, I was a fan just because, and I am still now, because you just don't know what you're going to get. And it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they did one, if I remember correctly, they did one 3 or 4 years ago on Raw. I think so. When it was in Vegas, I think they did it. Or that, because that might have been the episode when Kevin Owens attacked Vince. I have a vague memory of that. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't.
Know that I don't, because that was on SmackDown when he attacked Vince.
That's right. Yeah.
I know the Festival of Friendship was in Las Vegas, but I don't remember if they had
Raw Roulette
there or not.
I don't remember either.
In any event, though, it's really cool for NXT to bring it back for Halloween Havoc and different stuff like that. So, I mean, some people might think it's goofy. I think it's interesting. It's just a different way to bring something about.
Yeah, and it makes it an interesting time for Monday Night Raw because you don't really know what's going to happen, what's going to take place, which is always good. You mentioned it. The Elimination Chamber was invented during this time as well. Actually, basically right after Raw Roulette, it was announced for Survivor Series of that year, which the first Elimination Chamber is infamous for a number of reasons.
Oh my gosh, good and bad.
Good and bad. So the first off is being that it was literally just steel grates that these guys were taking bumps on, which it's amazing that only a couple injuries actually took place in this match, not more than that.
Right.
You obviously had the big moment, which we'll talk about Triple H here in a little bit because that man is just psychotic at times. But he was obviously getting ready to take a frog splash from RVD, who was going to jump off the top of the pod, but it wasn't like the pods now where you had room to actually stand up. It was the awkward position, and he overshot and went shin first onto Triple H's throat. And the man just continued to go on like nothing was wrong, even though he couldn't breathe.
I think it was I think it was bruised as a bruised trachea.
Yeah,
it was the official diagnosis.
Yeah, but he was saying every time we took a bump when he went down, he couldn't breathe because it was just like closing off again. So the fact that he was able to do that, plus he's been able to. Every time he gets injured, he still just finishes a match. He tore both quads and finished the match, and it was still a good match too, which is crazy.
Rabbit hole. This is what drives me crazy when people talk bad about Triple H. This, like, you can point to all these things right here. This is what drives me nuts when people talk about how he's not a good wrestler, or he's just, he's in the position he's in because he's married to Stephanie, or yada yada yada. Like, no, go back and watch some of this stuff and see all the stuff that this guy goes through. He's freaking incredible. Just saying.
He really is. And I think I was going to say, I don't think he gets as much.
No.
The flack that he does get, I understand for some of it, because there are a lot of matches that he's won that he had no business kind of winning. And the second elimination chamber is kind of proof of that. Yes, I'm sticking up for Goldberg in this situation because
oh my gosh, I can't believe you.
That's when Goldberg was relevant. Anyways, and so I think there are some moments like that where he deserves to be critiqued in a lot of ways, but his ability in the ring, his work on the mic, and his dedication to everything should not be taken away. I think he is one of the best to ever do it. In all honesty, just overall round performer, I think he is one of the best to ever do it, and this kind of goes to show that he is, because he's taken crazy bumps and has hurt himself at the beginning of matches and wrestled for 30 minutes and still went out there and killed it. Obviously, this was...
What's interesting to point out, let me stop right there. What's interesting to point out is he got injured very, very seriously by RVD towards the beginning of the match. Not only did he finish the match, he also did not stop Shawn Michaels from doing his big elbow off the top of the chamber. Even though the first bump injured him, he trusted Shawn enough that he was going to take care of him, and he let him take that bump. I'm telling you, if it had been anybody else, that bump wouldn't have happened.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Speaking of Shawn, this is kind of, we crossing 2 episodes a little bit, but this is his second match back from his 5-year absence, which the fact that this is his second match back and his first match back was as crazy as it was, just makes no sense that he was able to do what he was able to do. Which we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the Elimination Chamber altogether is still going on today. We're going to kind of lump the next two kind of together, because it was the Elimination Chamber, then it was Money in the Bank, which was done at WrestleMania 21. It was invented by Chris Jericho and
Brian Gewirtz.
And so they kind of created this thing. And what's interesting, kind of going back and listening to it, is that they wanted the contract to be for the very next day. And Vince was like, that's stupid. Let it be. No, the idea is good for a WrestleMania or for a match at some point, but not the next day. Let's make it whenever, for a year, anytime, any place, which is one of the best ideas in wrestling history, because it's allowed for a lot of great moments. One thing I did not know is that Edge had to be talked into doing this match, which is crazy to think about. But going back to his perspective, I understand why he had to be kind of talked into this, because he didn't want to be known, kind of like Mick Foley is known for the deathmatch guy. Edge didn't want to be known as the ladder guy, just the ladder guy at WrestleMania. So that I fully understand where he's coming from. But now listen to him being like, I was such an idiot for not wanting to do this match, because it literally made my career basically at one point. So that's crazy to think about that. While we're here, I figured we can go down another rabbit hole, because we've had this discussion a little bit before. But what do you think? Because you said before that this is the first cash in is your favorite cash in.
Yes.
Are there any others, or is that like your definite favorite cash in, best cash in of all time?
Obviously the Seth Rollins cash in is right under Edge's. And And when I look at the landscape of wrestling, Seth Rollins cash in is probably like, if we're ranking them, not with
Mhm.
my opinion,
Right.
I would say Seth Rollins is probably number one, but I would defend Edge's in saying Seth Rollins wouldn't have happened the way that it did without Edge's cash in, because as they highlighted in the episode, traditionally it would be like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
cashing this in for a match at such and such or whatever. And it was Edge's idea
Mhm.
to come to Vince and say, let me do this in the most heel way possible. If I've got this, let me get the most heat possible.
Yep.
And in Edge's words, I've listened to several interviews with him talk about this. That wasn't even a possibility. That wasn't even
Mhm.
on their radar as
Yeah.
far as that way to cash in. And imagine what Money in the Bank, the whole concept would
Yeah.
be had he not cashed in the way he did.
Yeah. He definitely did lay the foundations for what Money in the Bank would become until John Cena kind of, did his own thing and lost it. And, which I guess the first one to kind of say, I'm fighting you here with this was probably RVD at One
Yep.
Night Stand.
It was. Yeah, he was the first one,
Which,
because that was RVD was the second person to win Money in the Bank, because
yeah.
Edge was in 2005, RVD was 2006.
Yeah. My favorite cash in I've said before is the Seth Rollins, just
Sure.
because of how crazy it was and the call and everything. But if I had to be real, like from my favorite, because I think from a historical perspective, I think honestly it may go Edge and then Seth. But
Mhm.
from like my personal favorite, I think Edge's is probably my third favorite cash in, because I remember watching the Raw after Mania when Dolph Ziggler cashed in, and the
Mm,
pop that man got
yep.
was still gives me chills when I go back and listen to that. So, but it just goes to show that this match has made careers forever since it's basically started. It
Yep.
has made careers like Edge, like Dolph Ziggler, like Seth Rollins, like Big E that we're seeing right now. It's really kind of
Mhm.
elevated people even more, which we wouldn't have got without the Ruthless Aggression era and all these new innovation matches. But while some of them were great, we also have to talk about the elephants in the room, because there are a couple that are should have never happened again, and one of them has happened twice since then, and it's been terrible every single time, which is the
Punjabi.
Punjabi prison match, which still does not make sense why it's as complicated as it is. Because I think you could very easily just say it's a steel cage match, but with bamboo, and just be fine. I think it would have been
Right.
just as fine.
Yeah.
Um, do you have memories of this first? Because the first one was Undertaker and Big Show.
I don't. And I guess that's bad for me to say. I really don't have a lot of memories of this one. The one that I really um the one that really comes to mind for me was a couple of years ago was Randy Orton and Jinder Mahal. That's the one that, and then Khali comes back in the middle of it
Yeah,
and
for no
whatever.
reason.
Right. Well, like I get Khali coming back if you're going to align him with gender, and Khali
Yeah.
was the reason this whole thing was built, yada yada yada, whatever. But I don't hate the match as much as everybody else does. I'm
Mhm.
like you. I think there's easy ways around explaining this thing. But Bruce Pritchard said it best on the episode. If it takes you more than 30 seconds to explain the concept of the match,
Yep.
then you probably shouldn't do it. So
No.
from that perspective, I understand. I think the concept is interesting.
Mhm.
I just think there might be too much going on.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why a lot of people don't like it is when you're watching it at home, it's really hard to see what's going on, because
Mhm.
it's just the way that it's structured. It's very difficult to see what's going
Well,
on.
but I think though, I think that's a cop out.
Yeah.
And because WWE's production is smart enough, they can figure something out.
Yeah.
Like, put you a camera on the very top.
Yep.
Some brave soul needs to get in there and just be in it,
Yep.
you
'Cause they
know,
do
and
it for Hell in a Cell, so you can do it for this
exactly.
as well. Yeah.
Exactly. Elimination
Yeah.
chamber, all those things. So there's ways around it, I think.
Yep. Absolutely. So from one amazing idea to the other, we moved to the Great American Bash, which was the Dudley Boys versus the Undertaker, with Paul Bearer in a, what was it called? A
Concrete
concrete
crypt.
crypt. Yeah, concrete crypt.
Yeah.
Um I've seen this several times. I saw this before this episode, so I knew this was a thing. My question is, how are they able to actually pull this off
I don't know.
without killing Paul Bearer.
I do not know, and I wish I knew.
Because it looks like he's kind of behind it. So maybe like it goes up and like he's able to like sneak out as it's going up. But I still don't
I don't know.
understand.
I really don't know. Like, I wish I knew. Because I remember watching this vividly. I actually have the DVD of this pay-per-view. Yes, I'm that old. I actually have the DVD of this pay-per-view and everything. And like, I wish I knew how they did that, but I don't. I really don't.
Plus, what is the fascination with the Undertaker just killing people on TV? Because he did this, he hung Big Boss Man, he buried Paul Bearer in concrete.
Don't forget he choke slammed Muhammad Hassan through the stage.
Yeah,
when that was a thing.
He did that.
That's actually been a topic of discussion on the Something to Wrestle with Bruce Pritchard podcast about the Undertaker killing people on screen. It's actually a thing. So I don't remember exactly which episode that they deep dive into it, but it's a thing.
Yeah. Before we kind of continue on with a different discussion inside the innovation, but a different topic, one thing that I kind of want to bring up that I wish that they would bring back, because I think it is a phenomenal idea, it's just very difficult logistically to pull off, is the Taboo Tuesday, or I think they also did Cyber Sunday kind of thing, where they allowed the fans to vote what was going to happen. I think you could still do this. Probably like the Raw and SmackDown before the pay-per-view, you could do this and let it go as it is. But the fact that they did this, because we knew about this, but I always thought that this was like you vote, but it's kind of a rigged situation. And we quickly found out that is not the case. It was not rigged at all.
Right.
Specifically for the Chris Jericho Intercontinental Championship match, everybody thought that Batista was going to get the vote. Shelton Benjamin got the vote, pretty handedly got the vote, and he didn't know the match. He didn't know they called it on the fly in the ring. He didn't know he was winning until Chris Jericho didn't kick out. Yep. Do you remember Taboo Tuesday? Because obviously it's one of the only pay-per-views to not happen on a Saturday or Sunday. It took place on a Tuesday. Do you remember Taboo Tuesday, and do you kind of wish that they would bring a version of it back, or are you happy that they haven't done it since?
I absolutely wish they bring it back. I think it's a phenomenal idea. I really do. It really puts the product in the hands of the WWE universe. So I think this is a great idea. I know that WWE likes to have their stranglehold on what their creative is, but I think this would have been a fantastic idea to implement during the pandemic, during the Thunderdome era, because where you don't have a real live crowd reaction, you could have done this, let the crowd legitimately vote on what they wanted, and then that could determine sort of what direction you go in. Obviously, they still had the power and they can do whatever they want.
Right.
But I think this is a fantastic idea. I remember this vividly. I remember being mad that this was one pay-per-view that I really wanted to watch live because I really wanted to know what happened.
Right.
I did not know about the Shelton Benjamin not knowing that he wasn't going to win the title, or not knowing the finish until Jericho didn't kick out. I think that's very, very fascinating.
That is.
But one thing that I told you before we started recording that I think is something to bring up is something they did not highlight on that as to how real this actually was. And that being the Shawn Michaels Triple H match for the WWE Championship that night. Because it was a fan vote. It was Shawn. It was crap. I don't remember who the other people were. Doesn't matter. Anyway, Shawn wins the vote, to face Triple H for the WWE Championship. And the night before this happened, so this happened on a Tuesday, on the Monday before, Shawn hurt his knee like really bad on Raw.
Yeah.
Like, and just like, it was awful. Like, he should not have wrestled the next night, let alone, whatever. So the fan vote happens, and I think I read about this in Shawn's book. I think this is where I got this info from. But anyway, so he's talking about how the fans voted him, and he's not going to let the fans down. It was real. So they bandage up his knee. He goes out there. He can't even do his entrance pose where he gets down on both knees because his knees hurt so bad. There's an infamous picture floating around online of him from that show where you see one knee's down and then one leg is kind of out to the side. So if you Google pictures of Shawn Michaels' entrance, that picture is guaranteed to come up.
Yeah.
That's where that's from, because he couldn't put his knee down. And he goes out and wrestles probably 20 or so minutes against Triple H, lays it all out there, doesn't win the match, of course, but that just shows you how real this was.
Yeah.
Shawn should not have wrestled that night, but he did.
Yeah. Which kind of brings me to something I want to kind of talk about real quick, because it's a lot of these episodes kind of you can correlate to modern day product in some way,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously the next episode we're talking about is the first revolution, which is talking about the quote unquote women's revolution, divas revolution,
Mm-hmm.
that obviously took place here and then kind of fell off a little bit and then really has picked up over the last 7-8 years or whatever, with the four horsewomen coming from NXT and everything else. You kind of see the women's revolution rising. Now you have obviously with the future stars, you have a lot of talent in NXT that is being called up. Majority of the main roster today is nothing but NXT superstars that have been called up, which was the same way in the Ruthless Aggression of a lot of Tough Enough and OVW stars being called up,
Mm-hmm.
and being the fore focus. But I think one of the things that has struggled is they haven't had a lot of innovative matches to like go with the new era of wrestling in a lot of ways, because they're still living in the past with a lot of this. Because you still have Elimination Chamber is now its own pay per view. You have Money in the Bank, which is now its own pay per view, which is one of my favorite pay per views of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really have anything that is like this generation's wrestling style, or like this generation's wrestling. Do you agree with that? What do you think about that?
I think that's really interesting. It's not something I'd really ever thought about, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you, because you mentioned Elimination Chamber and Money in the Bank. You've also got Hell in a Cell, which is its own pay per view. You
Yeah.
also got TLC, which is its own pay per view.
Yeah.
You got Extreme Rules, which is a spinoff of ECW One Night Stand.
Yeah.
So, like, that's how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's half your pay per views right there.
Yeah.
So, our spinoffs. So, first of all, that just goes to show you how impactful the Ruthless Aggression era was.
Right.
5 of your 12 pay per views come from this era and are still being used today.
Yep.
So, kudos to that, to the innovations of the Ruthless Aggression era. But to your point, there's not really anything that's, at least off the top of my head, that I can think of that's really centric to this era, or the reality era, I guess. There's not really anything that I can think of that's like a step, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily as much like living in the past, because most of the time the past is good. I mean, you look at I know we're talking about WWE here, but look at AEW. Look at Cody and Brody Lee, and they had their bull rope match or whatever. Well, that's straight out of the 1980s NWA. You know what I mean? And people still get excited for stuff like that. So I think WWE probably overdoes it as far as the pay-per-views, the gimmick pay-per-views and that kind of thing. But I think everybody loves nostalgia every now and then. So, like, for example, Edge and Seth Rollins got a Hell in a Cell match in Saudi Arabia this year. Pull that thing out of nowhere. That's the way you need to do these gimmick matches, to make them special and to bring that nostalgia factor back, rather than staple pay-per-views. I know that's not exactly the question you were asking, but I feel like that's the way to go about it, to make it still not feel like we're relying on the past. We're still utilizing it well.
Yeah, and I think that's part of my, not issue, but part of my problem with having a lot of gimmick pay-per-views. I think gimmick pay-per-views work really well when, like, Money in the Bank, I think is a perfect pay-per-view gimmick. I think you could do it at WrestleMania, but I like having the fact that this is like right after WrestleMania. It's kind of like a new start. You give somebody a new chance to make themselves in a year to be the champion. I think that works better than having the Elimination Chamber right before WrestleMania and just kind of randomly having it, or Hell in a Cell just because it's October and Halloween and whatever. So I fully agree that the Edge and Seth Rollins Hell in a Cell match needed to be in Hell in a Cell because that's where the feud was taking it, not just because it was that time of the year where you have to have that match. And I think that's part of a lot of these matches have lost a lot of its prestige, because anybody can be in a Hell in a Cell match because it's in October, or Elimination Chamber just because it's in March or February or whatever it is. So I think that's part of why it's so difficult now to say, well, there's not really a match type that sticks out in this generation, and I think that's something that kind of is struggling with innovation. And I think it's hard to do innovative stuff now because it seems like everything has been done
Sure.
until somebody comes up with something to kind of break that mold. But I think that's kind of where we're at with wrestling and wrestling matches.
Yep. I agree.
So, all right, let's move on to episode 3, which was titled "The First Revolution," which is talking about the very difficult times that the women were going through during this time period. Obviously, we talk a lot about the Ruthless Aggression era and how great it was, but we kind of forget that it was very rough for the women's roster during this time,
Mhm.
because there was not a lot of time slots, and they were the first ones to always be cut, if they were even allowed to be on the show at all.
Yep.
Did anything really stick out? One thing I did want to mention before is I love the fact that Finley kind of got his start with producing women's matches here, which definitely set him up for being the women's producer now. Or I think he's still the women's producer. He was a couple years ago, but I think he still is now. But you can just kind of see that coming through even more. But was there anything
Yep.
that really stuck out to you in this episode?
That was really like, I knew that he was their producer, but it was really cool for them to highlight that, because I feel like you could not do this episode without highlighting Finley and highlighting what he meant to this revolution starting, because everybody says that the women's revolution started with Charlotte and all that kind of stuff. Well, no, it started here. And for anybody that didn't know that, this is a great episode, a great peek behind the curtain for you to see. No, this is where it started.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that jumped out to me that I didn't know was that the women weren't going to have a match at WrestleMania 20 until Molly volunteered to get her head shaved. That was crazy to me, because like, oh, well, there's a spectacle we need to see. Yeah, let's put the
Yeah,
women on, So I did not know that that was a thing. So
yeah,
that was really cool to me to learn. Um, but yeah, I thought this episode was really well done. I wish it would have been a little bit longer. I wish that
mm-hmm.
we would have gone a little more in depth on some of these specific women, because we didn't mention Jazz. I know she's in NWA, but didn't mention Jazz. I thought Mickey James got a really nice spotlight, because she really helped spearhead this thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Lita gets enough credit either when
No,
we're talking about some of the greatest women's wrestlers of all time. I don't think she gets mentioned enough, man, because she was right there in the thick of it, with Trish and all that kind of stuff. So I thought this episode was really well done. Really a good timing to, because like I said, current WWE really harps on Charlotte and Sasha and Bailey and Becky, and that's great. I'm not taking anything away from them, but
mm-hmm.
this is where it started,
Yep.
and there wouldn't be a Charlotte and Bailey and Becky without Trish and Lita and Victoria and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's it kind of goes to show how far ahead of their time both Trish and Lita were.
Yep.
Because if they were like in today's WWE, the matches that those two would be having with the roster that the women have now,
Mm-hmm.
it would be absolutely amazing. We just saw Trish and Charlotte a couple years ago, and it was
Yep.
as good as we expected it to be.
Yep.
And just think about if Trish was still in her prime and still able to do, she still was able to do everything she was, but if she was just still wrestling on a
Yep.
regular basis, how awesome that would be.
Yeah, give
To
me
see that.
2005 Trish Stratus
Yeah,
against 2020 Charlotte Flair, whatever. Yeah.
yeah,
Which brings me to the point that I know my dad's listening or watching or whatever he's doing, so I know he's going to. This is for him. Brings me to the point that I always bring up to people when we talk about women's wrestling,
hmm
is that Trish Stratus, to me, this episode still shows it. She is the greatest women's wrestler of all time, hands down, bar none. To
hmm
me, that's my opinion.
yeah,
Trish is the best ever.
yeah,
Because again, if Trish hadn't fought for what Trish believed in, for
hmm
if Trish didn't go to Finley and say, we can do this, can I punch people instead of slap people?
yeah,
If Trish had not done those things, there wouldn't be a Charlotte and there wouldn't be a Sasha, and because Trish said it at the end of the episode, man. She said, did I ever think I was going to be a women's wrestler? No, because it wasn't possible before
right,
this.
right,
Now it's possible. So Charlotte wouldn't have been able to step in and say, yeah, I want to be a wrestler, because it wouldn't have been possible.
yeah.
Trish paved the way, in my opinion. That's why she's the best ever.
Yeah, I think there's arguments to be made for a lot of people, but I agree. I think Trish is at least one of the best, if not the best ever to do it,
Mm-hmm.
just because she has laid the foundation for everything, and the stuff that she was doing during a time when they weren't allowed to do those things really, just kind of goes to show how ahead of her time she really was,
Yep.
and how she would still fit into this generation of wrestling. Just because thinking about Trish versus Charlotte, which we saw, but Trish versus Sasha and
Yep.
Becky and Bailey and Ember Moon and Asuka and
Trish
all of
versus
them.
Alexa Bliss, who we have
Yeah,
that we didn't get to see.
yeah, which
Yeah.
is one of my gripes about the first ever Women's Royal Rumble. If you're gonna have Trish and Lita in the same Rumble, you have to have them lock up, and they
Yep.
didn't. They weren't in at the same time, which was stupid.
Which is
Anyways,
dumb.
yeah.
Yes. I agree.
So let's kind of move on to episode 4, which I thought would be your favorite episode. Was one of my favorite episodes because I had not known a lot of this stuff about Shawn. I think they were definitely skipped one big thing when they talked about Shawn versus Hogan, which we'll talk about, I'm sure. But what did you think of this episode? Obviously, you said you knew a majority of this and not all of this that was kind of going on, but what did you think of this episode?
Um, man, I loved it, obviously, because I'm a huge Shawn fan. I love the episode, but it wasn't my favorite just because, like, I'm such a Shawn mark that I know everything that they talked about. But the part of the episode that still gets me, that really takes it, it really takes me back, and it really baffles me when I see it. And this happened in the Shawn Michaels A&E biography episode too, is when Triple H was talking about the day that SummerSlam match happened.
Mm-hmm.
And Triple H was talking to Shawn's mom and said that he's not going to let anything happen to Shawn, and just the emotion in Triple H's face, like, that gets me every single time. Like, oh my gosh. Like, that was the weight of this match. And then Shawn goes out and has the greatest SummerSlam match of all time, hasn't wrestled in 4 years, and he goes out and wrestles Triple H for 45 minutes and doesn't miss a beat. It's like, to me, that just shows why he's the greatest of all time. Like, the dude had like a street fight in 2000 for his promotion in San Antonio, but that was the only time.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he was doing his wrestling school and he was training guys like, I don't know if you've heard of him, Bryan Danielson. I mean, he was trained by Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
So, like, he was training guys and he was doing a couple of things, but for the guy not to have a full match and for them to go up to Stanford to the warehouse, which we're going to get to in a few minutes, for them to go up to Stanford to the warehouse to the ring to try to work the match out a week ahead of time. And Shawn ran the ropes like twice and took a bump, and he's like, nope, it's just going to have to be there. And then they go out and do it. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
He's so good. He is.
Good. I think going back to the Triple H thing, I think there was no better opponent for Shawn's first match back than Triple H. It had to be Triple H. Because of the fact that if anything happened to Shawn in the match, if Triple H was the one that it happened with, I think things would have been able to be smoothed over just because of that relationship and friendship that they had. But yeah, the emotional side of that with Triple H going and making sure that Shawn's mom knew that he wasn't going to do anything, and just the fact that he didn't know if the first punch he threw was going to just shatter Shawn completely. He didn't know what to happen, and then, like you said, Shawn goes out there and doesn't miss a beat and does one of his best matches of all time, one of the best SummerSlam matches of all time, and it's just it's ridiculous that he was able to do that.
I mean, like, I'm a humongous Shawn Michaels fan, probably one of the biggest that you'll see. Okay, and I will put that SummerSlam match in my top 10 Shawn Michaels matches, maybe top 5 of all time. Like, it was that good, and to know that he came off of not wrestling for 4 years, it's just unbelievable.
So I have to ask them, what's your favorite?
Shawn Undertaker, WrestleMania 25.
Okay, that's mine. I think that's the best WrestleMania match of all time
ever.
And I think the top three. I think the top three deal with. To me, I think the top 3 deal with Shawn and Undertaker and Triple H, because I think it's the 25, 26, 27. No, I'm sorry, 25, 26, 28. With Shawn and Shawn and Taker in 25, Shawn and Taker in 26, and then just that end of an era Hell in a Cell match in 28 was just when Taker eats the Sweet Chin Music and the pedigree and kicks out at like 2.999. It's just, you can't beat it. So I think that's
to me. This is one that's not ever going to get talked about. They highlighted the Kurt Angle match on here too. And that's a really good one too. But the one that will never ever get talked about, to me that I think is the second best WrestleMania match of all time, behind Shawn Taker 1.
Hmm.
Shawn Taker 2 is probably like right there for
Yeah.
26, but the one that'll never get talked about is the WrestleMania 20 main event triple threat match, Shawn, Triple H, and Chris Benoit.
Yep.
What an amazing match, and
Yep.
it'll never get talked about. But
Nope.
that one's up there for me.
Yeah, it really is. So, kind of talking about Shawn Michaels and his kind of comeback tour, because obviously he has that match at SummerSlam after being absent, being gone, all of his health issues and drug addiction and everything else, which I love the story that they told of
Man.
him and his redemption arc and his redemption story and everything. Um, he's
By the way,
slowly
if you
starting to.
want if you want a more detailed version of that, I
Mhm,
encourage you to go watch the A&E biography that they did. I guess that was back in the summer when they
mhm,
did that, because they really get more in depth in that. And there were things on that I learned about his problems that I really didn't know about. For example, Triple H traveling with him, setting an alarm every couple of hours so
yeah,
that he could go check on Shawn to make sure he was still alive. Like
yeah,
that's how bad it got.
yeah,
So I encourage you to go check that out. If our listeners haven't done that, make sure you go check out that biography for more details on that.
yeah. So we kind of had that match, one of the best SummerSlam matches, better than anybody expected. He was honestly just expecting that to be a one-off match, and then Vince calls him and said, "Hey, we're doing the Elimination Chamber. We want you in it." And Shawn can't turn it down, so he does the he does the first ever Elimination Chamber, wins it, and then like he kind of said in the documentary, I went from being the guy that came back from a career threatening match to just being one of the top guys again. Like in just 2 seconds, I was right back where I was.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes on this ridiculous run through his second comeback after injury, and then we
Mm-hmm.
come to the Shawn Michaels versus Hulk Hogan match, which is one of my favorite matches to watch, just because of the fun that Shawn has in this match. One thing that they did not mention, which I'm not surprised that they did not mention, and I wanted to get your take on it, is there is a lot that was leading up to this match.
Mm-hmm.
From what I have heard, from that, it was supposed to be a trilogy, or at least two matches. Hogan was going to win the first one, and then Shawn was going to get his win back.
Mm-hmm.
And Hulk Hogan, in Hulk Hogan fashion, said, "Nope, this is going to be a one off, and I'm just going to beat you." And then
Mm-hmm.
Shawn's like, "Well, if you're going to beat me, then I'm just going to make this a stupid match," and just kind of
Yep.
went out there and did that. They didn't really mention that. They didn't mention it at all in the documentary. Um, what do you think of? Because Sean even said in the thing, like, if I did it again, I would do it the exact same way that I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the fact that Johnny Gargano was like, "That's the greatest big boot leg drop of all time."
Mm-hmm.
What were your thoughts on all of that?
One other thing that they didn't mention is that the match was supposed to be a face versus face match,
Yeah.
and that was originally what it was supposed to be.
Mhm.
Sean wanted it to be, because he talked about it on there. He said, "I didn't know it was a possibility until it was a possibility," and then so Sean basically wanted this match to happen,
Yeah.
and Sean wanted the storyline to just be, "Hey, Hulk, I just got to know, can I
Yep.
beat Hulk Hogan? Can the icon Shawn Michaels beat the icon Hulk Hogan?"
Yep.
And they started running with that for about a week or so, and then Hogan said, "Nope, that doesn't work for me, brother. It needs to be babyface versus heel." And then they wanted the Attitude Era heel, Shawn
Yep.
Michaels. So that's where we get the Larry King spoof. That's where we
Which
get,
is, by the way, one of the greatest segments of all time.
it's incredible.
I
It's so
absolutely love
good.
that. And that's
So
also
good.
where we get the "Who's Your Daddy" Montreal
Yes.
promo and
Yes.
the Bret Hart
Bret
fake
Hart
out, which
thing.
was amazing.
It's so
Amazing.
good. It's so good. So um yeah, the trilogy thing, yes, I believe that was a thing. I think it was supposed to be Mania, Survivor Series, or sorry, SummerSlam, Survivor Series, Mania,
Yep.
or Survivor Series or SummerSlam, Rumble, Mania. It was supposed to culminate at WrestleMania the following year,
Yep.
and it didn't happen for obvious reasons because that doesn't work for me, brother. Um, so yeah, that I believe that to be true. That doesn't surprise me one bit.
Yep.
Hogan was difficult to do some business with sometimes. I'm going to leave it right there because
Yep.
the immediate thought in my head is Starrcade 97, and we're not
Oh
talking
no, we
about
don't want
that.
to go that. We don't want
We
to go
can't
that.
talk about that. So
That's the podcast. We're gonna have to wrap.
yep, we will have to wrap if we do that. So no, I thought it was hilarious that Shawn said that he doesn't regret any of it and he'd do it all
No,
the same again.
absolutely.
Um, and I'm just glad that they got this one match, whether it was going to
Yep.
be 2 or 3 or whatever. I'm glad they got this one.
Yep. And it was honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way either because it's the most memorable thing
Yep.
just because of the circumstances and the way Shawn handled everything.
Yep.
It was absolutely amazing.
Yep.
And then we kind of learned that DX gets back together because at the following WrestleMania, Shawn hits the crotch chop on Vince before he hits the elbow from the ladder through the table, and Triple H saw that and was like, "I'm going to hit one in my match just to kind of do it." And then there you go. DX plants the seeds of returning. They get back together to go against Vince and the Spirit Squad, which is some of the stupidest things, which is amazing at the
so
same time. I love it. I hate it and I love it at the same time. Because you get like Triple H dresses Vince, Shawn dresses
Dude,
Shane.
I'm telling you, that segment with them dressed
so
as Vince and Shane is probably my favorite DX segment ever. I love it so much.
I love it. And I still don't understand why when Vince gets mad on TV, he grabs his ear and pulls his ear. I don't know if that's a thing he actually does.
Okay,
But
so that was the night Ric Flair was coming back in 2001.
Yeah.
And according to Bruce Pritchard, that was supposed to be a signal for somebody to cue music, or it was supposed to be something.
Yeah.
And somebody wasn't paying attention, or something ran over or something. So that was Vince just being like, I'm pulling my ear, let's go. So that's where that came from.
But now he just started doing it then
Yes.
with
Yes.
everything. When he got mad, he's screaming and yelling and grabbing his ear and everything.
Yes.
So then you have DX coming back together, DX returning, and then we're heading into the next WrestleMania, which John Cena is the champion. It's supposed to be Triple H versus John Cena again. Triple H blows out his knee, continues and finishes the match like a madman that he is. And then we get John Cena versus Shawn Michaels, which is not talked about a lot, but it's a really great match between the two of them, just because it's John Cena and Shawn Michaels. So why wouldn't it be? I also love hearing that John Cena was like, you could wrestle Shawn 1,000 times and it would be different and amazing and easy all at the same time, which kind of goes to show how great Shawn is.
Which leads to their better match, in my opinion. WrestleMania was great, but about a month later, at a Monday Night Raw in London, they go for almost an hour. That match is the one to watch to me.
Yeah,
that's
a good match.
Oh man, that match is so good.
And then they had a triple threat like a couple years later when it was Shawn and Triple H and Cena. John Cena, because that's the match when it started off. Shawn hit the Sweet Chin Music on Triple H, and it was just there it was on from there. So kind of before we wrap and move on to the next episode, because you kind of have two versions of Shawn in WWE. You have his Attitude Era version, and then you have this Ruthless Aggression Era version. To you, which one is the better version?
Second run. Okay. Ruthless Aggression run for sure. There wouldn't be a Ruthless Aggression run for Shawn if it hadn't been for the early run of Shawn. Obviously, it starts with throwing Marty Jannetty through the barbershop glass in 1993. 1992 into 92. And then Shawn goes on an incredible run, has the best matches on the card. And I don't think it gets talked about as much. It doesn't get enough notoriety because all of his friends left. So all of the guys that he would have been lined up to beat and to be the guy with, they all left. At the exact same time, Bret Hart took 6 months off. So Shawn was stuck wrestling the British Bulldog, Goldust, Vader, and Mankind. Like, not taking anything away from those guys, but like, you line those guys up, but then you say, okay, Shawn versus Diesel, Shawn versus Razor, Shawn versus, if the excuse me, if the curtain call hadn't happened, Shawn versus Triple H, Shawn versus Bret Hart again. I mean, like, so I don't think it gets talked about enough. He has some incredible matches in that run, but the second run to me, I mean, it's like, it doesn't compare. No. The second run is, I mean, you've got Kurt Angle. I mean, we're just talking WrestleMania matches here. Kurt Angle, The Undertaker twice.
Cena,
Cena,
Benoit, Triple H.
his 2-year run against Triple H. I mean,
Yep.
just ridiculous stuff. And the stuff that wasn't at WrestleMania, he had a huge run with Chris Jericho in 2008 that was one of the greatest feuds ever.
Yep.
I mean, like, to me, there's no comparison. It's a Ruthless Aggression era Shawn all day long.
Yep. No, I fully agree. I think this is the best version of Shawn. I think if Shawn wouldn't have come back, I don't think he would be in the conversation, honestly, as one of the greatest of all time.
I agree.
But I think now...
I think it would be close.
Yeah.
I think he would obviously be up there, but like the way he came back and took it to a whole other level was just insane.
Yeah. And I think he is definitely on the Mount Rushmore, definitely top 3. I don't know. I think there obviously is a lot of arguments for number 1, but I think he is definitely up there.
What gets me is, like, if you listen to just about anybody out there who will tell you the best in-ring performer is Shawn Michaels.
Yep.
Is he number 1 overall as far as marketability and promos and changing the wrestling business and yada yada? Maybe not.
Right.
But best in-ring performer, bar none, is Shawn Michaels.
Yep. I think the only person that could be up there is, honestly, I think right now is AJ Styles. I think AJ's up there as well.
Sure
for in-ring, and I think Kurt Angle is up there for in-ring because Kurt Angle is ridiculous. Speaking of Kurt Angle, let's move on to episode 5, which is OVW and Tough Enough, and basically the future stars of the WWE, which they're no longer the future stars, they're the past stars. But we're and except for like Randy and Brock and Shelton, but other than that, they're kind of all moved on. I didn't realize, going back and watching this, when you talk about like the future class, and when you talk about OVW, the class you remember is that first class, which is Brock and Shelton and Cena and Batista and Orton. After that, I didn't realize the second class included like Mickey James and Bobby Lashley and I think Sheamus was in there, and Beth Phoenix and Natalia, and
there's one more that Crime Time was in there.
Crime Time was in there. You had
there's somebody else that I'm thinking of. I just watched this episode before we started. Anyway, I don't think it matters.
I don't think it matters either. But I didn't realize that the crop of talent that came from the classes of OVW, which led into FCW, which obviously led into the NXT that we have now, that is whatever it is now. I don't really know what to expect from NXT anymore. But
what it was before and what it is now.
Yeah. But you also had like Tough Enough, because like I didn't realize like Josh Matthews was in the first season of Tough Enough, which blows my mind that he was in the first season of Tough Enough.
Dude, there are so many guys and gals.
Byron Saxton. I saw Byron Saxton had like tried out for it. I did not know he tried out for Tough Enough. John Morrison had won it.
John Morrison was in it.
Obviously, the most known is Miz coming from it.
Miz. Ryback was in it. Ryback was in the season where Miz was in. He did not win that season.
Obviously, thank goodness.
If you remember, here's a random name. Evilise from she was in AEW for a hot minute.
Yep.
Lucha Underground. She was in Tough Enough. A lot of people were in Tough Enough. I can't think of them all off the top of my head, obviously, but there were a lot of people in Tough Enough that you didn't realize were there. I think Beth Phoenix was supposed to be in Tough Enough, and then she had a heart condition and they wouldn't clear her. Yeah. So she couldn't do it or whatever.
Yeah. But also you had guys being sent back down to, whether it was to rehab an injury like the APA, or you had guys that were sent back down to get in shape and to kind of grow and to get better. We're looking at you, Big Show,
Mark Henry.
And Mark Henry. Yep. But like even Mark Henry said, I thought it was a demotion, but it turned out to be the greatest thing for my career, because he got sent back down to OVW. When he came back, he kind of went on a little run, but then that Hall of Pain run that Mark Henry went on was, if that was Mark Henry his whole career, I think Mark Henry would be known as one of the greatest big man of all time, because that was an absolutely epic run that he had. And so you see a lot of like newer guys that were coming up. Obviously that first class was ridiculous, because I love to listen to I think it was Jim Cornette that was talking like the best wrestler we had was Shelton Benjamin, because he was the most athletic. Brock was the most athletic looking guy. Cena cut a promo like he had been on TV for 15 years for the
Good
first time
grief.
ever, which doesn't shock me at all. Randy Orton has the IQ of a professional wrestler, and then Batista is just Batista because of how
Right.
big that dude was when he got to
Yep.
OVW.
Yep.
And so that first class was just like crazy, the talent that they had. But it
Dude,
seemed like they were able to stock that each and every time as well.
Yeah. Seeing some of those early videos of John Cena, it
Oh, they were
amazed me.
crazy.
It amazed me how comfortable he looked
Yep.
in the ring. Like to know that he came to the main roster and he almost got fired.
Yep.
Like the disconnect there
Mhm.
just blows my mind because of how good he was in OVW, and then that transition to WWE didn't go so well, and then
Yep.
look what he became, obviously.
Yep.
But that transition just blows my mind because he was so good so early. He really was.
Yep.
And then, obviously you mentioned Brock and Randy and Batista and Shelton Benjamin. I feel so sorry for Shelton Benjamin because he is the one that always gets left out when you talk
Yep.
about that first OVW class.
Yep.
And like Cornette said, he was the best wrestler there. He's still going today.
Mhm.
He had an incredible run with Team Angle with Charlie Haas and Kurt Angle. Obviously is the gold standard,
Yep.
Intercontinental champion.
His stuff now with the Hurt Business was
amazing. And stuff like that. And
Yep.
then I think he had a run on the Indies before he came back to WWE that was really good. One of the greatest Shelton Benjamin highlights of all time is the springboard getting super kicked by Shawn Michaels. I mean, like, I think that will be played for forever.
And all of his stuff in the first Money in the Bank match. When he like ran up the ladder and clotheslined, and he took crazy bumps off the ladder. He was the athletic guy of that group. And I think part of his problem, which was not his fault at all, is that was not necessarily. I think if the Shelton Benjamin that was in OVW was the Shelton Benjamin today, I think he would be pushed a lot more because it's just that style is fits more with what he was. Not saying he can't do that now, but obviously he's not in the prime that he was in OVW, because it was built more for the Brocks and the Cenas and the Batistas, and it was a miracle that Randy Orton did what he kind of did because he was undersized for a lot of it. Which I love to hear him say. He showed up, did not know where he was, and all of a sudden Batista opened the door and he went, I think I'm in the wrong place. I don't know what I'm doing.
I wish, honestly, that we would have heard more from Randy in this documentary. I feel like that's one guy that, you had a little bit of Batista on there. You did have Brock on there. You had Shelton on there. Had a little bit of Cena on there. But I feel like Orton could have really been the backbone to help tell this story a little bit more. I wish we would have gotten more into that.
I need an Orton documentary because I just want to. I feel like his story and his run in WWE is amazing.
There's a couple. There's one on there that's pretty good. And then the last season of Ruthless Aggression, which I'm going to go back and I'm going to see if I can find our episode that we did on last season of Ruthless Aggression. I'm going to try to get that posted for everybody so that they can check that out of season 1. But the Evolution episode on season 1 really focuses on Randy and Batista. So if you're looking more for their story, check out the Evolution episode from season 1.
Yeah, but I mean, just like a whole career perspective. When he finally retires, I think he's one of those. I think he's one of those guys too that could go down as one of the greatest of all time, just because of all the stuff that he's done, in his career. And it's just crazy to think that guys like those 5 that came through that class, and then we talked about the second class, which was like Bobby Lashley, Santino Marella. Which
I was getting ready to say
amazing.
Santino. Yep, Santino.
Yeah, which I mean, he wasn't the greatest wrestler in the world, but he was entertaining. Like that dude is one of the funniest pro wrestlers of all time. Him and R-Truth are up there as like 2 of the funniest guys of all time. So I love the fact that they came through there. We got a lot of Tough Enough stuff that came through this with Morrison and with The Miz. Obviously it kind of all started off with the warehouse in Stamford, Connecticut, which had, The Rock was training in there, and you had Kurt Angle was training in there, and
Edge and Christian and
the Hardy Boys and all of them.
Test, Val Venus. I think I saw Sean Stasiak in one of those. I mean, just like the list goes on and on of guys that went through there.
Yep. Was there anything else that kind of just stuck out to you about this episode, or maybe about any of the other episodes that we didn't get to touch on?
In particular about this one, the Security in the Future episode, I'm so glad that they involved Jim Cornette and Dr. Tom in this, because you couldn't tell this story without those 2 guys.
Yeah.
I was really glad that Cornette was involved in this. I know he's been kind of in and out as far as in good graces with Vince McMahon. So I'm really glad that he agreed to do this.
Yeah.
I thought the whole series was just a home run again.
Hmm.
I don't know that there'll be a third season. I don't know what else they can come up with as far as that other guy that we didn't mention in the second class, Dolph Ziggler.
Yeah.
Dolph was in the second class of OVW. I don't know what else they could come up with as far as topics for a 45-minute documentary from the Ruthless Aggression era. But throughout this season and the last 5 episodes in season 1, it just further cements that this was my favorite era of wrestling. Yes, It was fun to flip back and forth on Monday nights during the Monday Night Wars, and I lived through that. I was, the kid that was recording both shows every night and just like clamoring to see what was next. 1997 was like the greatest year of all time, and Sting didn't wrestle a match, and just all of these things. But the Ruthless Aggression era, I don't know. I can't pinpoint what it was. I could easily say it was Shawn's comeback, but I can't pinpoint what made this my favorite era. But just every year it felt like there was something different, and it just, I don't know, it's incredible. I love it. It just makes me literally want to go back and watch all of the Raws and SmackDowns and pay-per-views from this era. I loved it.
Yep. I think this is my favorite WWE era, probably as well, because it was extremely well from the beginning to the end. The end kind of tapered off a little bit, like most ends do, because that's
when you're transitioning from Ruthless Aggression to reality and whatever, like that makes total sense.
Yeah. Which, by the way, kind of one thing that we didn't talk about in the innovation episode was the Bite This, I think is what it was called.
So glad you brought that up.
Yeah, because of it's one of the things that was talked about when Vince was on there was like, we go through fluxes and this is just a flux, and when we go through this, then we get our next thing that kind of sticks out and comes out. But also probably the most infamous episode from Bite This was with Matt Hardy and Trish, and not Trish, with Lita and Edge, and it was just it's one of the most well-known things is when there is reality based in the storyline of wrestling. It's absolutely amazing, and it can't be beat. And this is one of those.
I really wish that they hadn't included that on this episode. And not to say that it wasn't good. I just don't feel like it fit. Like, yes, it was an innovation. Yes, it was ahead of its time. But I don't know. Like, I feel like if they were going to include that, they needed to go more down the path of, well, we're in this reality era now where we get peeks behind the curtain and yada, yada, yada kind of thing. And I don't feel like that they did that. I feel like they just kind of stuck it in there just to show something else that didn't work out. I felt like they, the Punjabi prison and, whatever else didn't work out. I just feel like that, I don't know, I like the show. I like the concept. I like the telling the story of it. Obviously, Edge and Lita and Matt Hardy, I love that storyline, but I just don't feel like it fit in this episode.
Yep. Which, by the way, did not shock me at all. I think it was Bruce Pritchard that said he did not like it because it kept him accountable, basically, is why. Because one of the funniest things is, like, I think it was named, the writer was Brian that was on there.
Brian
and
Gerwitz,
yeah, and he was like, Stone Cold said, "What about the creative? Oh, that's not good that he said that about us."
Right.
So that's
And you mentioned it. You mentioned it a few minutes ago, talking about Vince talking about the flux going between eras or whatever. Stone Cold unfortunately got caught right in the middle of that. Because he was transitioning from the Attitude Era to the Ruthless Aggression era, and whatever creative was happening wasn't working for him personally, and ultimately led to the end of his career.
Yep. And I think, honestly though, I think the Bite This has led into our generation, like this generation now, is because this generation is definitely reality based. We want to know the news. We want to know what's behind the scenes. We want to know when Charlotte and Becky hate each other. Like, we want to know all the stuff that is behind the scenes, which is why I think these documentaries are so popular now. And so, like, we enjoy them so much, is because we get to see the behind the scenes stuff. I think that's why the Dark Side of the Ring has been so great, is because we get to see the in-depth story behind a lot of the wrestling mysteries over the years that we did not know a lot behind, like the plane ride
Yep.
from hell and the Montreal screw job, and which that one has been played several times now. But there's a lot of things that we want to know behind the scenes of, and that kind of all started right here with all of this. So
Yep. Absolutely. And like I said, it might not have fit in the episode, in my opinion, but it's worth talking about because it definitely blazed the trail for where we are now, for sure.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up on this episode?
Man, just I apologize for those of you who may have heard us cough and hack around, both of us dealing with Tennessee allergies. But this is something that we really want to talk about. So we hope you guys are hanging in there with us. Make sure you subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. Make sure you follow us on social media. Andy is at Andy_PBWP. I am at Chris Belcher 24, and the show is at PBW Podcast. So just make sure to follow us. Get on bodyslam.net's YouTube channel, check out our past episodes, and make sure you give them a like and a follow and support them as well. I know they would appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for doing most of the outro for me. I don't have to remember all that stuff now.
Hey, you're welcome. That's what we do.
That's why you're the host.
That's why.
But yeah, we really appreciate everybody tuning in and listening and joining us for this very fun, in-depth look at the ruthless aggression. There we go. I got fired for that.
Ruthless aggression.
This was a lot of fun to kind of go back and look at all of this, and look at two of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and look at one of the greatest eras, if not the greatest eras of WWE of all time. And so it was a lot of fun to kind of dive in and to look at this and to reminisce and remember and look at why we love what we love and where we're at now. I think a lot of this is I don't think we'd be in the spot we're in now without a lot of these things that took place during this time.
So when you're going back and you're watching this, if you haven't watched any of these episodes yet, then you need to stop what you're doing and watch them. But when you're watching them, don't just take it for, on the innovations, for example. I'm not trying to go down a rabbit hole as we wrap up here, but on the innovations episode, for example, you see all this Money in the Bank match. Oh, I'm going to go watch that match. Don't just pick out those big ones. So go back and watch. I highly recommend the Shawn Michaels Triple H SummerSlam match. Go watch it. Go back and watch some of these things because they're really entertaining. They are extremely. The Trish and Lita match from Monday Night Raw when they main evented was just absolutely incredible. Yep. So go back and watch some of these things and really dive into what the Ruthless Aggression era was. Don't just take it for what these documentaries are. Go back, and I know a couple of weeks ago we were talking about Eddie Guerrero, and I mentioned the RVD Eddie Guerrero ladder match.
Yeah,
that was from this era.
Yep.
The Jeff Hardy Undertaker ladder match for the Undisputed Championship, that's from this era. So just all of these kind of things. Dive into some of those Raws and SmackDowns and pay-per-views and just check those out, because this really was WWE getting off of the Attitude Era, getting off of the shock factor, and getting back to wrestling. If you want to watch WWE wrestling, this is the era to do it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for this old school edition of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. Once again, make sure you follow us on all social media. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy_PBWP. You can follow Chris at Chris Belcher 24, and you can follow the podcast at PBW Podcast on all social media platforms. Make sure you go to ProWrestlingTees.com to buy yourself a wonderful, lovely T-shirt to help support the podcast and spread the good word of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. You can also subscribe to the BodySlam.net YouTube channel to check out this episode, as well as all of our other archived episodes that we have done over the last couple of months. Go check those out as well. You can also go to SportsWire to listen to our audio version of the episodes each and every week. So go check them out there as well. But once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening, and we will catch you guys down the road.